Hi all, and welcome to another conversation we'll be having with Professor Andrei Malay of Babel, who is the head of the Demidov International Association. Today we're going to be talking about the connection between Stanislavski and Demidov, and we're just waiting for now. So Andre should be joining us in a moment. Hopefully he is here, and here he is.
Hello.
Welcome, Andre.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank you for helping organize this. It's a very important topic, obviously, and just in general, I think it's a wonderful tradition that we've started some time ago, right? Both with Demidov Studio London and Demidov Studio Moscow, in two different languages, obviously, to respond to what you have to say, to respond to what our viewers are interested in hearing about and discussing. And so we actually want to encourage everyone to go to the demidovassociation.com, to go to the association's website and contribute questions, because last time we were talking about last second emergencies kind of situations that we as actors deal with, right? And today we are talking about a relationship between Demidov and Stanislavski. But we really are responding to what you are curious about. We're responding to what you want to hear about. And what's going to happen is Andre will be voicing your questions, right? And we will be answering them. But please go to demidovassociation.com and first of all, check out this new site, which tells you more about the association. And second, please write to us with the questions that you want us to cover, because that's exactly what we are going to do today. And that's what we did last Saturday. And we will continue to do it for as long as you are asking us the kind of questions that are crucial to your life as an actor, to your career as an actor, as a teacher, as a director. And so that's one of the missions of the association, right? The association that we started has that mission to educate about Demidov, to set standards connected with the Demidov training, and also to offer this very important vision of Demidov. Because, as we keep repeating, Stanislavski called what he created, with Demidov's help, of course, he created the system. Stanislavski acknowledged Demidov's tremendous contribution to the Stanislavski system. Demidov was the first editor of An Actor Prepares. Demidov was one of the three only trusted teachers who was actually prepared by Stanislavski, trained by Stanislavski, and then acknowledged by Stanislavski as, at the end of the Stanislavski's life, acknowledged by the Stanislavski as the only teacher who understands his system. The first head of the Moscow Art Theater School, and I could go on and on and on and on, because nobody had the kind of relationship with Stanislavski as Demidov had, spanning over the period of 30 years. We do realize that Vakhtangov, another trusted associate, died when he was only 39. Sulerzhitsky, a great associate of Stanislavski's and a friend of Demidov's, died when he was in his 40s. So we do have to put things into perspective. Only Demidov followed the development of the Stanislavski system, and only Demidov followed the change and the metamorphosis of the Stanislavski system, and most importantly, influenced this change, according to Stanislavski himself, out of all of the disciples and all of the associates. So that's one of the reasons why we started the association, to put things in perspective. Stanislavski called it a system. Michael Chekhov called it technique. Followers of Stanislavski called it method. Demidov called it school. And that's what association is doing. It is actually positioning Demidov as a school. It's positioning Demidov as something that takes several years to master, which is why we are starting the actor certificate course, which is actually launching on October 4th.
October 4th.
It's a huge event in the Demidov world because for the first time, there will be a course dedicated entirely to the Demidov curriculum based on the curriculum that Demidov himself developed. And so that's what the association is doing, explaining that you don't pluck things out of Demidov, right, and sell them as Demidov. That Demidov is actually a school. And so to briefly put things in perspective, it's only in 2016 that I published Demidov's Heritage in English. So you do realize that everybody who is posing as a Demidov expert, if anybody is doing it, got the book in 2016, right? How many times do you have to read that book? Book is huge, right? You can read it, you can kill a man with it, as I keep saying, right? So how many times do you have to read this book before you begin to really understand what it's saying? Then you need to start practicing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So who is out there today in the English-speaking world who can claim that they have mastered it, right? So needless to say, they're teaching, you know, smaller courses, master classes, incorporating it and merging it with other techniques, which is one of the subjects of today's conversation, right? Exactly. Can you combine Stanislavski and Demidov? But certainly nobody has that expertise. And sorry, it's a fact, right? I've been working with Demidov closely since 2006. So it's only after 10-year research that I dared to publish Demidov when I knew that I can offer something. I can offer that training, which I have been offering all over the world since, which is why the actor certification program is now intact, right, is actually active. And our teachers who are certifying are now in the second year of their training, right? And this training is going to be a 3 to 4 year training, depending on the goals of a particular teacher. So that's how seriously we approach it. And so that's exactly what we're here to do today, to demystify certain areas that are very murky and mysterious, including Stanislavski and Demidov. Andrei, over to you.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Andrei. That's a great introduction to what we're going to be speaking about today. And I think an important point to make, right, that that this is a school and not a collection of techniques, not even a technique on its own. It's something much more holistic. So, as we said, we're going to be speaking about the connection between Stanislavski and Demidov today, and we had a bunch of wonderful questions last week.
We did,
related to this topic.
Which is why we started today. We ran out of time last Saturday, and we just approached that first question about Stanislavski and Demidov.
Yeah, so it's a good thing that we scheduled today to sort of cover as many of these questions as we can. We got a bunch more as well in the following week. What I thought might be interesting, first of all, Andrei, which might actually touch on a couple of these questions overall, is to talk about that kind of initial relationship with Stanislavski and Demidov and how that kind of developed. Because when we talk about Stanislavski, when people ask about the technique, let's say today, I guess we have to ask which version are we talking about, right? Because there is no Stanislavski technique as such. There are many different interpretations of it, many different permutations of it today.
Of course, because someone like Richard Boleslavsky, right, who was with Stanislavski as part of the first group that Stanislavski trained in his system, along with Leopold Sulezhitsky, Richard Boleslavsky immigrates to the West shortly after. So which version of the system has he got? The early version, right? And so we have to remember that Demidov, for example, kept working on Stanislavski for 30-something years. Stanislavski went from extreme dictatorship to beginning to embrace the Demidovian freedom, right? He went from hours of table work preceding the start of the rehearsals to no table work at all. Whose influence do you sense there? Right? Whose influence is there behind the physical actions? whose influence is there behind abandoning table work, abandoning analysis at the start of the work, whose influence is there, let's just go on stage, you read the play, just go on stage, let's begin, right? Now, wouldn't it be nice if Demidov embraced all of the things that, wouldn't it be nice if Stanislavski embraced all of the things that Demidov gave him, right? He couldn't do it, right? He was too old, it was too late, right? It was too difficult considering everything else Stanislavski was handling. But certainly we are seeing a huge transformation of the system. And although what Demidov offers is superior because it operates out of a different view of the universe to begin with, that is more accurate. Nevertheless, Stanislavski is trying, right? Stanislavski is hiring Demidov as the first editor of An Actor Prepares. Stanislavski is giving platforms to Demidov to teach, right? So we do have to acknowledge, and thank you for starting with this, that before we talk of differences, we need to speak of a collaboration.
Yeah.
Because already in 1909 or even 1908, if I'm not mistaken, 1 year after the two men met, because they met in 1907, which is also the year of the inception of the Stanislavski system, interestingly enough. Already in 1909, Demidov begins to send to Stanislavski the results of his own experiments based on the ideas that they are developing and that Stanislavski is introducing, of course. Be it pointing Stanislavski toward yoga, which is documented. It was Demidov who pointed Stanislavski toward yoga, saying to Stanislavski, why are you inventing a bicycle? Everything that you're searching for is already there in the yogic exercises, and giving him a book to read, right? So, and of course, also experimenting tirelessly with certain techniques, right, that are inspired by the principles of the so-called Stanislavski system, and supplying the results of these experiments to Stanislavski. Starting again in something like 1909 and all the way until Stanislavski's passing in 1938, right? So it's a huge contribution. So it's not for nothing that in the introduction to An Actor Prepares, or Actor's Work, it would be accurate to translate it, not only does Stanislavski express his gratitude to Demidov, but acknowledges that Demidov gave him valuable, invaluable directions. So who is the boss? Right? Exposed his mistakes. So who knows better? So why is it that Demidov was the boss in many ways and knew better? Because of his professional training as psychologist, psychiatrist, physiologist, right? So the whole Demidov school is based in the psychology of the creative process. That's what it's about. It's applicable to acting, it's applicable to sports, it's applicable to music, it's applicable to scientific discoveries, it's applicable everywhere, except he develops it for obvious reasons. He develops it for the art of acting, specifically for the internal acting technique. Although you can do so many more things with it, and we are doing that. So we have to realize that when Sulezhitsky introduces Demidov to Stanislavski, he introduces a medical student who is versed in psychiatry, psychology, who is actually studying to be a psychiatrist. He's introducing somebody who is a practitioner of yoga and many other Eastern esoteric disciplines, and not only Eastern esoteric disciplines, Western as well. Right? So Orthodox, Christian Orthodox, and many others. So we have to remember that Sulezhitsky was making that introduction with the Stanislavski system in mind, of course, and the contribution was huge until basically Demidov remained as the only teacher of the Stanislavski technique that was trusted by Stanislavski after the death of Vakhtangov and Sulezhitsky. And so when Stanislavski is opening the studio of the Moscow Art Theater, or the school, excuse me, of the Moscow Art Theater in the early 1920s, he is asking Demidov to head it, to be the head of it. And Demidov goes to work to meticulously implement the Stanislavski system only to realize it is not working. It is not producing the results that they were hoping for. And then the first fateful conversation between them happens in 1923, where Demidov comes to Stanislavski and says, this is not working. What do you mean this is not working? We need to do it differently. How? Without objectives, without actions, without through line, without super objective. Demidov says yes, without any of it. At which point he's fired from every position that he held, and at that point he's a #1 teacher of the Stanislavski technique. He's fired from every position that he held and is starving ultimately. But it's interesting thing what happens to you when you are unemployed. You have time on your hands, right? So Demidov begins to write what we now have as a Demidov heritage. And Andrei, what I published in 2016 in English is a fraction of the whole heritage, because not only do these 5 books that appear in this huge volume had to be, not only they had to be abridged for obvious reasons, but they also are supplemented by a wealth of material in the Demidov archive that only I and few other individuals who don't care about it have access to, right? So that's also something that we are doing as an association. We are gradually bringing out the unabridged 5 volumes, right, which we will be beginning to actually publish through the association website and then also in book form. And we are transcribing the Demidov archive. That's also something that I am doing constantly, making sure that those things that are not transcribed yet and must be added to the books are gradually appearing, because there's a wealth of experience, knowledge, and a huge contribution to the future of our art form and actor training, as well as director training, obviously, and teacher training, and obviously pedagogy. All of it is in the Demidov archive still. So that's another function that the foundation is serving, right? So that's the first kind of fight. Now, in the early 30s, having been away for a while, right, Demidov managed to present Stanislavski with the fruit of his own work. Demidov's student by the name of Morozova introduced Stanislavski to the group of students that she trained according to Demidov's method, because she was a student of Demidov's. And Stanislavski, having watched these amateurs, not actors, who trained for 4 months, couple of days a week, 2 to 3 days a week, right, in their free time after work. When Stanislavski watched them, he said, do you realize that these people could tomorrow be admitted to the Moscow Art Theater? How did you do it? And this is when Stanislavski turns around and hires Demidov as the editor of An Actor Prepares and employs Demidov back at his theater. But when they get to the book, Demidov says, you realize what's happening? You don't have a chapter on the subconscious. So the final chapter of An Actor Prepares was not planned by Stanislavski. We have to know that. And so Demidov says, you need a chapter on the subconscious. That's the most important thing. Stanislavski, with Demidov's help, creates that chapter, which is chapter 16, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then Demidov says, now you realize that the previous 15 chapters contradict the final one. What do I do? Asks Stanislavski. You have to rewrite the book. Stanislavski did not rewrite the book. He chose an easier path. He fired Demidov again. Didn't fire him from everywhere else, but certainly fired him as the editor of An Actor Prepares. And with the help of Demidov, previously he tried to make ends meet. They did not meet. Then he decided that in the preface, which is not published in English, interestingly enough, in the preface he was going to first say in huge bold font, the whole meaning of my book is in the last chapter, is in the chapter of the subconscious. This is what my book is about. That's the meaning of my book. I'm sorry, if the meaning of your book is in the final chapter and the first 15 don't have that meaning, there is something irrevocably broken. right?
Yeah.
And then there is a paragraph on Demidov there, right? He exposed my mistakes. He gave me invaluable directions. Okay. Also not printed in English, interestingly. Like the original preface to An Actor Prepares has never been printed in English. That's a story of Stanislavski's interpretation and misinterpretations in the world of the Western scholarship. And then he said, Stanislavski said, the book is going to do more harm than good. And that's Stanislavski's words. So he knew Demidov was right. He just didn't have time to finish it, right? And then what happened after Stanislavski's death, when Stanislavski was no longer protecting Demidov, is a whole different story, which we will cover sometime on a different occasion, right? So that's what I would like to say about this. Andrei, what other questions or thoughts do we have?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Andrei. And
absolutely.
It kind of it leads into some questions which kind of relate to understandings and misunderstandings about Stanislavski that are still current today, right? So,
yeah.
The first question we have is, can an actor use several different techniques simultaneously in their work? And the follow-up to that is, one can learn how to be a writer by copying great authors. In doing so, one can develop their own style by absorbing the best quality of these greats. Can one become a good actor by copying outstanding professionals in their field? It's kind of a two-part question, I suppose. The first
it is a two-part question. Let's start with different techniques. Stanislavski made it very clear that there are two directions in the school of acting, and Demidov agreed, right? It's translated into English in very different ways, but let's say presentational and representational, right? So it suffers, right? These translations really suffer. So let's say the art of living on stage and the art of faking on stage very skillfully, right? So if you are plucking different aspects from different trends, from two different lines of not only thinking, but living on stage, right? Although, can you call imitation living? Okay. So do you see what I mean? So if you're trying to use these two different things together, organic and inorganic, right? Authentic and fake, then we have to quote the Bible. You cannot serve two masters, right? You can serve God or money. You cannot serve both. Although a lot of churches are trying to do it, aren't they? Anyway, right? So it's very difficult to serve two masters. You are ultimately going to love one and hate another, right? So that's the problem. You have to believe in something. Yeah. And whatever it is that you believe, you will ultimately do well. And whatever it is that you don't believe in, you're not going to do so well. Demidov has this wonderful book, which is Dangerous as Hell, Actor Types. Dangerous as hell because he is basically introducing the idea that there are four creative types among us, and that we predominantly belong to one of them: imitator, emotionally willful, intellectual, and affective or tragic actor. Tragic actor, by the way, is the greatest in comedy as well. So when you hear tragic, don't think tragedy or drama, right? Think comedy as well. Tragic actors are the best comedians because they do it with such seriousness and emotional immersion, right, that the audience really is laughing, right? So that's where we are there. And so depending on which type you actually dominate toward, right, of course, you better choose yourself one direction in which to go. Within this direction, right, you certainly might find that one interpretation of that direction, one school within that direction, one technique within that direction is working better for you than others, right? But again, what is it that Stanislavski tells us in the final chapter on the subconscious? Although, is it Stanislavski saying it or is it Demidov? There's enough indication that Demidov is saying it, not Stanislavski. He says, unlike other teachers, I believe that actors, beginners, must be led immediately to the subconscious from the first day of training by passing elements. bypassing tricks, bypassing devices, bypassing, let's work on this separately, let's work on this separately, right? And if that is not done, they are going to learn the system abstractly, which will do them tremendous harm. Now imagine these students in the Stanislavski's classroom, because an actor preparers is designed as a classroom, right? With teacher, Tartsov, and the students. And imagine that they come basically to the last lesson of the year and hear that instead of working separately on all of these elements being concentration of attention, relaxation of muscles, muscular control, right, imagination, objectives, through line of actions, tasks, right, communion, instead of separately drilling all of these elements, they should have been brought immediately to the subconscious from the first day and trained in that. That so-called creative state does not consist of any elements, that it is indivisible, and you cannot train the elements of the so-called creative state separately, praying to God that they're all going to miraculously merge into one creative state. That's not how it works. And Stanislavski said it, by passing the elements straight to the subconscious, right? And excuse me, which training does it? Meisner, Strasberg, Stanislavski? Who does it? Who takes the actor straight to the subconscious and has them actually live improvisationally and freely and subconsciously and intuitively and impulsively from day one, giving them a total workout of everything that is a part of an actor's process? Only Demidov does, right? And so, as an expert in Vakhtangov, Michael Chekhov, Stanislavski, as a person who obviously knows what was done with that in America and in other places, I can certainly tell you there is no other exercise, and there is no other school, most importantly. I'm talking about Demidov's etudes, and I'm talking about the Demidov school, which of course goes outside of the etude technique, right? Which has nothing to do with Stanislavski's etudes. Stanislavski's etudes are Demidov etudes turned inside out, right? Where you are pre-deciding everything and then improvising the lines. Where do actors ever have to do that? They're given the lines, right? Which is what Demidov does. He gives the actors the lines and nothing else. So there is no other exercise and no other school that takes actors straight to the subconscious from the first lesson, right? And so, okay, I'm going to study the Demidov guy, but of course I'm going to also use my bag of tricks that I acquired from Meisner, from Strasberg, from Michael Chekhov, from other. The question is why?
And
why do you need crutches? What, your legs are broken? You can't walk? Why do you need crutches? Because these are devices that tell you how to nail a particular moment in your performance, right? Which basically comes out of very interesting school of thought. And that school of thought says, you're not going to transform into character. You're not going to become inspired. You will remain your actor self. So in order to nail that moment when you're supposed to cry as a character, you have to use such and such device. Why? If you're in character, right? And if someone very close to you is dying, why would you not cry? Only under one condition: if you're not really in character, if you're not really transformed. So Demidov is teaching you how to transform into any character, transformability. Not how to transform into that character by finding their through line of actions, their unique bits and objectives, their unique tasks and desires. No, he's teaching you how to read a play, right? Learn your lines, or not learn them if you have a prompter, actually, right? Long lost art, but a beautiful art of prompting. And then just go and be that character through daily scales, of course, through daily work on self. It doesn't come without tremendous work, and it doesn't come without taking a course with an expert. Because that's what Demidov says very clearly. On one hand, you can only learn from an expert. On the other hand, you can only teach yourself. And here you have the combination of what Demidov graced us with, actorly scales that are finally given to us by Demidov, psychological scales, and of course, the outline of training, which we found in Demidov's archive, which was pretty obvious in certain parts and very murky in other parts. But in the Demidov archive, I discovered a 4-year outline of training, which I translated into 4 semesters of training, 2 years of training, right? Which is now actually about to launch on online, which actually is another story, how incredibly effective Demidov is when it comes to online training, right? It is eerie how effective it is. And there it is. It's starting on October 4th. And as Andrei and I actually promised, we're not advertising the course because it's a huge commitment, obviously. It's an unprecedented opportunity, but also is a huge commitment, right? But we want you to be aware that the entirety of Demidov is the entirety of Demidov, right? And I believe there are still something like 2 spaces in this course. We are basically finished with recruitment, but go to the association's website, to the demidovassociation.com, and just see what that sequence is and realize when somebody is teaching you masterclass in Demidov, right, and is not telling you about the whole picture, which our teachers, of course, our certified teachers are about to be certified, working towards certification, are very clear when they're teaching a shorter course, right, that this is part of a larger whole. And larger whole is something to be aware of, That's why go to that site,
and
go to the page.
Outline is there, right?
And the outline is there, right? So that's going to actually give you a greater sense of the Demidov sequence, right? What else?
Very good. So
second question, right? So my first answer is, why would you need to do it? Right? Why would you need to do it? If you are combining different approaches, it means that none of them actually satisfies you. So why would you work with an approach that does not yield the results that you know you can achieve and must achieve? So that's my kind of, I'm answering it with a question. The second one is a very interesting question. Copying great masters, yes or no? Do not copy great masters literally. But watch their secrets, steal their secrets, and copy those secrets. Right? Never ever try to imitate anyone, because you will use your inimitable individuality, right? And you don't want to do it because you're not them and they're not you. But as you're watching them and you're noticing certain things about them, for example, wow, they have no body. They're just built of spirit. Right? I do not see the physical body almost. I see their thoughts. I see their emotions. I see through them. How did they lose their body ultimately? How did they become transparent? That's what Demidov was doing with the great tragedians. That's what he was observing, Andrei. Right? He was observing their secrets that they didn't want to share because that was their bread and butter. Right? He observed those secrets and he created techniques that helped him to steal those secrets. So yes, absolutely. Copy the essence. Do not copy the particulars, the letter, right? Only the spirit, not the letter.
And not the form. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Good. And just to say, guys, that we are getting some questions coming in now as we're having a conversation, and we will try to get to those, right? We'll try to get to as many of those as we
Mikhail is asking, can we discuss the acknowledgement of one's current state of being as a completely appropriate place to begin acting, because we are human, embodying a character who is also human? Yeah, because Stanislavsky says, take the objective, mobilize, fulfill the action. The moment you do it, you killed the starting point. You killed your humanity. You killed where you were. Now you're forcing something, right? Now you're forcing something. And Stanislavsky knew it. And so he said, oh, yeah, you have to take that objective consciously, but fulfill it subconsciously. How? Demidov has this wonderful analogy. He says, that's great. So that means that you decided to marry someone to gain something, right? But you're courting them out of love. Right? You made a conscious decision to marry someone for their money, and now you're courting them out of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
How possible is that? I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry. It's either love or money, right? So, yeah, so killing where you are, what you feel, what you think, what's going on, killing that at the start of a scene, at the start of a rehearsal, at the start of a etude, and then forcing yourself, mobilizing to do something is a dead number, because that moment you destroy the very material that your character is created out of, the very material that your character's thoughts, emotions are created out of, which is you, what you feel now, what you think now, what's going on now. That secret was known to Vakhtangov, he just forgot it. But they kind of knew that secret, because every great actor works like that. Demidov is the only one who created a school, right, that actually teaches it and makes it a bulletproof instinct.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's move to another question then, which we have here. As an acting student, I find it hard to be trained simultaneously in Demidov and the system. This is a related question, right? So it's interesting how the themes are kind of threaded through a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
I find it hard to be trained simultaneously in Demidov and the system. Demidov liberated me and calmed me. The system made me rigid and paralyzed me. When I was training to combine things, it was even worse. Is it possible for a student to be trained at the same time in Demidov and in the system without being confused, without feeling that he has to choose?
No. Next question. No, 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 and no. Why? Because two different universes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The universe where the sun, right, revolves around us, and the universe where we revolve around the sun. The old, the old concept of the universe, Demidov, action, objective, I want, I fulfill. Good luck. How are you going to want something that you don't actually want?
Or you don't know yet what it is that you want.
And so on and so on and so on and so on, right? Oh, you should lure this now. Now we are luring it. Now we are hunters and we are luring it. And on and on and on and on, right? All of these devices that come throughout the Stanislavski career to ultimately fix what's irrevocably broken. And what's irrevocably broken is the view of the universe, right?
Yeah.
I get up because I want to get up. I get into my car because I want to get into my car. I drive to the airport because I want to drive to the airport. I actually get on the plane because I want to get on the plane, right? I go to Moscow because I want to go to Moscow. No. No. You received a phone call in the middle of the night, which you did not anticipate. And the phone call said that your dear friend is very sick, right, and wants to see you. And that event forced you out of bed, forced you to your computer to begin to search for flights, right? Forced you to, to try to find the closest flight, but also the one that you can afford, right? Forced you to begin to pack your bags in a hurry, forced you to call that car to the airport, and so on and so forth. The circumstances are doing it to you. You don't want anything.
Exactly.
So the moment Demidov starts working with a completely different view of the universe, where it is the circumstances that are operating us, rather than we are trying to operate the whole thing, then things change, right? And so you cannot work like that. You cannot work out of the Demidov school of perception, where everything is based in perception, and out of the Stanislavski school of action, right, where everything is based in action. You can't. Now, action in Demidov takes care of itself beautifully, gorgeously, amazingly, right? Because as I perceive that phone call, right, as it goes to the core of my system, it propels me into action that I just described, which you can film or see it, right, or see it on the stage, and oh boy, it's going to be active. But the truth is that person is completely passive. The person who is flying to see their friend in Moscow is completely passive. They certainly look incredibly active, and that's what deceived Stanislavski, but they're passive. They're yielding, they're surrendering, they're green lighting. They're being operated by the magnetic power of the circumstances, by their pull, by their push. And that's what Demidov trains with you from day one.
Yeah.
Your ability to yield to circumstances and become very active through absolute passivity, right? So that's why Demidov calms you, my dear person who asked this question, right? And Stanislavski jerks you into tension and nervousness, right? Because you are not wired the way that Stanislavski thinks you are wired, because you as a human being, you are wired differently. Stanislavski did not graduate from Moscow University with a degree in psychiatry and psychology. He wasn't a friend of Ukhtomsky and Vygotsky. He wasn't valued by Gurdjieff. Or Gurdjieff, depending on how you pronounce it, right? So he wasn't a man, right, whose books, like Demidov's books, were published after huge persecution in the Soviet Union at the insistence of the greatest Soviet scientists, psychologists, physiologists, and psychiatrists. When these greatest scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists of the time read Stanislavski, they said, yeah, this is very true, or rather it was very true about 5 years ago. Then they read Demidov and said, oh, this is very true, or except it will be true in about 50 years. So in 50 years, our science will catch up with what Demidov discovered 50 years ago. And guess what? It's doing it. Now, I'm not calling scientists to approve of Demidov. Scientists, for the most part, don't know what they're saying, because they're saying one thing today, another thing tomorrow. But yes, they're now inventing instruments that can measure things, right? Simply measure things, of which Demidov was aware, completely aware. That about 4 seconds before you think to do something, your subconscious already made that decision.
Exactly.
They now know it with scientific accuracy. So needless to say, you need to be able to greenlight something that did not yet materialize in your head, to greenlight your instincts to be a real actor. Because your head is going to send you contradictory ideas. Right? When I was directing, prior to my knowledge with Demidov, very often I would tell an actor as my notes, right? Would it be nice if you were to do this in this particular moment of the scene, come close to your partner or walk away, right? And they would say, that's exactly what I felt like doing. And I would ask, why didn't you do it? Oh, because I thought my character wouldn't do it. Or because I thought you wouldn't like it as a director. Do you see what happens when you're listening to your thoughts? Your thoughts are criticizing you, saying, oh, no, that's wrong. While director, of course, an audience sees what you really feel like doing, and they're completely connected with that. And then when you don't do it, they go, right? They don't even understand what doesn't satisfy them in your acting, but that's what it is. You're not following your own creative intentions. And that's exactly what Demidov is cultivating in you from day one, your ability to follow your creative urges on every level. Thought, feeling, emotions, physical sensations, all of it.
Which is one of the big problems, of course, with actions and objectives, right? That I'm forcing myself to want something before my creative individuality has even had a chance to arrive at that point. I'm forcing myself to want something. I'm planning all of my wants in advance before I've even had the chance to live, for my creative life to actually arrive to that point.
Yeah, Karin, Moscow Art Theater program is in Stone Age, right? Is in the past, really. So if you are interested in Chicago, Karin, please write to us. Go to the DemidovAssociation.com. We have a teacher in Chicago who is being certified as a Demidov teacher and actually received an MFA from my program. We will connect you with that teacher and we will find a way to help you. So Karin, just go to DemidovAssociation.com, send us a message, please, and we will connect you specifically with a teacher in Chicago who is part of the association.
Very good. Well, I'm just aware of time, so let's get to the next question,
Please.
which is actually one we had last week. If we want to fully, and I think probably you've already answered this to a large degree, if we want to fully understand the work and she calls it method of Demidov, should we study the life and work of Stanislavski? And there's a couple of parts to this question. That's the first part. I think this is directed to you, Andrei. When you were a specialist of Stanislavski, Vakhtangov, Chekhov, and Demidov, how does one stay objective and not blindly follow one path and deny others?
Yeah, I mean, you don't follow anything that does not yield results. You follow what yields results. When you went onto the stage, so to speak, or decided to become an actor in film, you felt tremendous powers. You knew that you can walk onto the stage and change the world. You could galvanize people. People will laugh and cry and will faint there. Their lives will be changed. And then when you started working practically, you realized, oops, you don't have this power. And then you began to settle. Then you started listening to all of these other masters who tell you, here's a shortcut, here's how you go around it. This is how to be at least passable, believable, right? Yeah, you're not going to wow anyone, you're not going to galvanize anyone, but that's okay. Music will be playing, you'll be wearing a flashy costume, the strobe light will be going, right? A lot of people will be dancing behind your back. Nobody's going to even notice you're acting. As long as you're not faking crudely, you will be passable, right? Or in order to evoke tears at this point, think about this and so on. That's not what brought you onto the stage. What brought you onto the stage is the feeling of the genius inside you that can be alone on stage without all of that auxiliary stuff, set costumes and so on. We love them, of course, right? But that's not what you envisioned. You envisioned you are on stage and the audience is completely in your command and you're taking them wherever you want to take them. And you're telling them some of the most sacred and important things, and they're laughing and crying and they're ecstatic, right? And they're going home and they're changing their lives and they're asking someone to forgive them, right? They are mending their ways with someone who used to be their enemy. They are completely transformed. They're starting a new social movement toward justice. That's what you were actually dreaming of. And Demidov says, yes. And settling for anything smaller than that is called to be a deserter. And this is how we go to meet your genius, right? So that's Demidov. And everything else is, okay, if you want to solve that problem, that's how we're going to solve it, right? And yes, it's going to make you passable, ultimately. Only Demidov says, only genius, only most heightened ideals, only your absolute top potential and nothing else. Only Demidov talks about the great tragic actors who were alone on stage. And when the Russian tragedian Machalov, right, who was actually there at the same time approximately as African-American tragedian Ira Aldrich, and they were compared with each other, although Ira Aldrich, for obvious reasons, could not play in America. He had to play in England and all over the world, including Russia, right, because he was a black man, right? And so one of the greatest 19th century actors that Demidov draws inspiration from, right? And so a Russian actor who creates at the same time, Machalov, at the end of the second act of a play, sees in a mirror that he is being poisoned by his close friend, begins to slowly rise, sees it behind his back in a mirror while shaving, begins to slowly rise to his feet, and the entire 3,000 people at the Bolshoi Theater, where drama was performed at that time, not opera only, were rising with him. Curtain closes. For 5 minutes, they're just standing there, not realizing what brought them to their feet. Then they begin to gradually come to, look around, and realize what happened. That is the power of an actor that Demidov is talking about. Now compare it with the lofty goals behind other followers of the so-called Stanislavski system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first part of that question was, should we study the life and work of Stanislavski to understand Demidov?
Yes, absolutely. But where? I would say study it from Demidov. Demidov has a lot of very important observations. Why? Because he was with Stanislavski from the beginning to end. Go to someone who was with Stanislavski from the beginning to end, from right 1907 to 1938, which is the lifespan of the system while Stanislavski was creating it. Go to Demidov. He will explain to you what it was all about, what goals were set, how Stanislavski deviated from those goals, why he deviated from those goals. A lot of it is excusable. A lot of it is understandable. Stanislavski was a pioneer. And if you look at the first steps of the scientists in any area of science, you will know there were mistakes.
Yeah.
They're inevitable. First steps in every science were mistakes. It's understandable, but they actually got it going. Stanislavski got it going. He will remain, therefore, the greatest man in the history of theater, right, and acting, still because he was that pioneer, right? Did he alone inspire Demidov to create the superior school? No, Stanislavski wasn't the only influence. Stanislavski himself had a lot of influence, but Stanislavski got a lot of people going, right? Because he started putting some science, not knowing perhaps a lot about science, psychiatry, psychology, but he started trying to do it. He ultimately listened to Demidov. Yes, it was torturous to hear from some Demidov that I, great Stanislavski, am, wrong. So you have to understand he was a human being, not a god, as we've made him into, right? So we have to understand all these things. But Demidov will give you a very clear picture, because he was there from the very beginning to the very end, of all of the transformations in Stanislavski's teachings and where they were going and why they were happening. That's what you really need, rather than plucking, bits and pieces, or listening to the followers who, Strasberg, who went to Moscow, did not meet with Stanislavski, and for the rest of his life had to explain why he did not meet with Stanislavski. And every time he explained it, the story changed, right? He was sick, Stanislavski was sick, whatever, right? He was afraid. He was simply afraid that Stanislavski was not going to confirm what he believed, and he knew Stanislavski was not going to confirm what he believed, right? So if we are talking about Stanislavski, let's remember that American method is not Stanislavski, it is something else. Right? It can produce wonderful results, it can work, it cannot work, it is whatever ultimately works for you.
Exactly.
Whatever works for you, right?
Exactly.
So we have to realize that. There is a wonderful lecture that Michael Chekhov gave in Hollywood on 4 approaches to character, right? And there's a lot of brilliant things there mixed with a lot of things that are completely misleading, and one thing cancels another, because he's talking about 4 different actor types, Andrei. And without explaining that each method of working on character belongs to a different actor type, right? He is just talking about different ways of doing it. And people are confused because they're trying to go with one thing. But at the end, he makes a brilliant statement. He says, you can use all of these 4 approaches, you can use one of these 4 approaches, or you can use none of them. Good night.
Very, very helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. So, good night. And because it is actually 5 minutes to the end of our conversation, right? We probably do need to start thinking about good night, especially for some of our viewers who are in Russia. But in the remaining few minutes, what else have you got for us, Andrei?
So actually, we had a couple of questions. I mean, there's a couple more, one more about Stanislavski and one about something else, but we had a few questions related to film and the Demidov technique and film. And
May I
maybe that's a
suggest
subject for,
something?
for another.
You know where I'm heading, right?
I do, yeah.
Okay, next Saturday then, Demidov and film.
I think that's a good idea. I was going to suggest.
Because the course that we are starting on October 4th, right,
Mhm.
is actually as much a film course as it is a theater course because it will be happening in Zoom.
Yeah.
And having been working very successfully in Zoom since March of, basically nonstop since March of 2020, because I've been doing it with my graduate students, with my undergraduate students, I've been doing it with all of the intensives, right? That I do throughout the summer. The summer course was dedicated to film. Of course, we figured out that as long as there is a frame, right, we are actually working, training for film. And then we brought in a lot of things that are exclusive to film, right, and started also training them. So let's talk about Demidov and film next Saturday, if that is something that you think is a good idea.
I think it's a good idea, and I think it's worthy of another full conversation because
It
I think
is. It is because yeah,
there are a
3
lot of
minutes into the
yeah,
3 minutes until the end, we're going to butcher that, right? We're not going to do it justice.
exactly.
So please go to demidovassociation.com, right, and tell us what would you like to know about Demidov and film, Demidov School of Acting in application to film, right? How that freedom actually can be married with that strictest requirements of continuity, for example, discipline and cheating that film is famous for.
And by the way, this could also include working with self-tapes because I think there've been a few questions relating to that. We spoke a little bit about this last week, right?
Yes, but we have a question actually from Robert, I think, right, which is about self-tape, and we still have some outstanding questions about self-tapes, and some other questions that we can actually apply to Demidov and film.
And which we can address next week. I'm really sorry if we didn't get around to your question today, but I think it's a good idea if we come back for another conversation next week and we just frame it around film and some of those questions about self-taping. And also,
and if you were typing the questions and want us to remember them because they'll disappear, please just send us an email. Go to demidovassociation.com, send us an email, and we'll make sure to cover your questions. Andre, you probably need to wrap it up so you could save it, right? Because it's under an hour.
Just one thing to say that if those questions that are currently on screen you can also DM me at on this account, right, Demidov Studio London, in addition or instead of going to the association website, but you may want to check that out.
Yeah,
anyway.
check the association website, and if you are familiar with Demidov Studio London, and it's easier for you to send an email there, then send an email to Andre at the Demidov Studio London.
Very good. Thank you so much, Andre, and thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week, I hope.
See you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.